Hi everybody and welcome to my review of Rise of the Third Power, a 16-bit turn-based Japanese-style RPG similar to games like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, but based on the political climate of Europe in the mid-1930s. The game released on February 10th, 2022 for the Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Full disclosure, the publisher, DANGEN Entertainment, provided me with a code for the game, so a huge thank you to them. Also, if this game looks up your alley at the end of the review and you're a PC player, consider heading over to the Epic Game Store and using creator code Cdub719 at checkout to help support my work. It really means a lot. Rise of the Third Power registered high on my list of games to play almost immediately because I was instantly reminded of a game I played and really enjoyed last year called Arafel Enhanced Edition. The look and feel were spot on, and when I looked closer into it, that's when I found out that it actually comes from the same developers, Stegosoft Games. Like I said, I really enjoyed my time with Arafel, and with Rise of the Third Power being touted as a bigger, bolder, and better experience, it basically became a must-play on day one for me. Arafel was the first game developed by Stegosoft and did well enough for the studio to continue to make games. With Rise of the Third Power, Stegosoft set out to deliver a project that surpassed Arafel in every way with a larger scope, longer playtime, greater ambition, and a deeper narrative. The team turned to Kickstarter to back their project with a goal of $10,000 and finished with just under $15,000 of backing. They also made the effort to move from using the RPG Maker engine and built a new engine from scratch using Unity. They trialed this engine by moving Arafel over to it and enhancing it, thus creating Arafel Enhanced Edition, the game that I played and enjoyed so much last year. Rise of the Third Power is their first game built from scratch using that new engine. Now, before I get into the game proper, I want to interject something real quick. If you've seen another review of mine in the past, you know I haven't been attaching scores to the games I review. That's going to change going forward, as Rise will be the first game that I give a score to. I still plan on laying out the positives and the negatives, but I feel like a score can be helpful, especially once you get to know a bit about me as a reviewer. For the record, I played on normal difficulty and I was able to snag all the achievements except one and did all available side quests. Finally, I spent just over 40 hours with the game, but streamed the entirety of it. It's likely that a typical playtime will clock in around 35 hours or so. Alright, let's get into it. The story leading into the game goes like this. 20 years ago, the greatest war in human history rocked the three kingdoms of Rin and their allies. As the world lay broken, blame was laid at the feet of Arcadia, leading to the eventual collapse of the Arcadian government. From the ashes arose Emperor Noriskov, who seeks to restore the former glory of Arcadia at any cost. You control a party of resistance fighters with varying backgrounds working together to try to undermine the efforts of Noriskov. It is a story that promises intrigue, betrayal, humor, and an epic journey covering a vast world. With the stage set, let's dive into the highlights of the game for me. Here are my positives. Number one is the battle system. I'm always pining for a good turn-based battle system, and with Rise of the Third Power, I was not disappointed. The combat plays out like your typical turn-based battle system, but there's much more focus on the use of abilities and spells. Basic attacks are not really a thing. There's usually some sort of standard attack specific to each character, but each attack is intended to be used tactically and with thought. Some of these skills require certain moves to be employed first. Some require a certain amount of guts or MP to perform, and some can be used at any time. Knowing when to use certain attacks will help with your battles, but there's another piece to the puzzle as well. You'll always have the ability to swap out your characters at any time during battle. While not quite as useful as, say, Final Fantasy X, which allows for moves to be used as your new characters come in, Rise characters still get to make a move that round, but they move to the back of the order of actions list, which is always present at the top of the screen. While it is beneficial for strategy, it does carry the consequence of delaying a potential attack during a turn. Therefore, I found it more useful to use the ability to get a weak character out of the line of fire before enemies attack and to prepare for the next round of attacks. You also will have team abilities that you can unlock throughout the game that are very powerful. Having the right squad available to use those abilities will definitely pay off over the course of the game. There is one very slight consequence to this system though, which I actually think is not really different than any other turn-based system, but I still feel it worth mentioning. Some of the battles can feel a bit repetitive. In most areas, you'll run into the same groups of enemies on multiple occasions. While the first couple of fights with these groups almost feel like solving a puzzle as you learn their moves and tendencies, after a bit, it becomes a bit monotonous using the same moves over and over for the same group of enemies. It's not significant enough to become a real problem as you are typically moving from area to area quickly enough, but it does crop up from time to time. Also, to the developer's credit, it is much less of an issue than it was in their last game. My final thought on the battle system is how great it looks. As is standard with most turn-based RPGs, allies and enemies face off on each side of the screen. The sprites look great, but that's pretty standard fare. Now the real magic happens when you choose your moves. There are really good animations and effects that take place with each attack. Think along the lines of Octopath Traveler, whether it's a slash attack that comes with an arc of red mist, a mortar attack that peppers all enemies with explosive shrapnel, or sending plague-ridden rats to infect your enemies. Every attack looks, sounds, and feels great. My second positive are the characters. This game features some of the best text dialogue I can remember. I loved every member of my crew in Rise of the Third Power. From Rowan, the drunk former pirate, to his sidekick, the quirky and borderline suicidal Karina, all the way to the antisocial, brooding Aiden. Each character has their own personality and they come through because the game as a whole is incredibly well written. There are moments that are hilarious, moments that are heartbreaking, and some that are truly shocking. There are some pretty extreme moments in the game, but the characters always remain believable. As the game went on, I found myself being more and more attached to them, and it was rewarding seeing them grow and evolve as events unfolded. My third positive is the overall story. I feel as though the story was strong throughout. When it starts, we're introduced to Rowan and Karina, who are trying to infiltrate Castle Evanhart to kidnap the princess. We remain unaware of their motivations, but they recognize that it's a ridiculous plan that will likely get them killed. This kicks off a sequence of events that leads us all over the three kingdoms of Rin. The story is paced well, covering 7 chapters and an epilogue. While I enjoyed my experience all the way through, there are gonna be people that I think will be disappointed with how it ends. After reflecting on the ending though, I think that it fit nicely for what the characters set out to do and potentially leaves the door open to revisit this world at a later date. My fourth positive is the music. The real tragedy here is that there's no soundtrack available for this game due to licensing issues. There are some really good tracks that play over the course of the game, including 2 of the best boss tracks I've heard in a long time. And the town theme for Ishtala is just the right kind of haunting and beautiful. There are other stellar tracks in the game as well, but one issue I did notice is with some of the looping. Instead of the song feeling constant, there were tracks you could very much notice the end and the beginning. My fifth positive is the progression/upgrade system. There are 3 main ways to upgrade your characters and party in the game. The first comes through the use of team points, which are acquired when you reach a new team level. That's right, there are no individual character levels in this game. Instead, there is a single experience point meter that fills up. When it becomes full, you get team points. These points are used to upgrade your characters. Typically, each level gets you at least 2 upgrades, but when you have several characters to manage, you have to choose wisely as to how you spend those points. Enhancements include new abilities, enhancing abilities, or stat boosts. You can enhance the number of team points you receive by using different items, crafting new equipment, or learning new abilities, but choosing which character to upgrade when will always play an important role in the game. Speaking of crafting, the second way to upgrade your characters is by crafting new equipment. Each upgrade you can craft will provide a permanent boost to the stat being affected. Crafting requires resources that you can purchase from stores, find in treasure chests, or receive from elite enemies you defeat in battle. This also eliminates the idea of buying new weapons. There are 2 weapons for each character in the game, but most of those are found throughout the world and use the same crafting upgrades between each weapon. And the final way of upgrading your characters are through items known as ruins. These runes are incredibly powerful and offer team-wide stat bonuses when acquired, and there's no need to equip them. You typically receive them as rewards for completing side quests. They range from raising the party's strength by 2 points to restoring 35% of the party's HP after winning a battle. There are 14 in total, and they even tie directly to some pretty heavy side content. My sixth and final positive is enemy respawns. This seems like a strange thing to include, but I think this fixes a real problem with this genre as a whole. Games like this promote exploration, which is great, but also in games like this, sometimes that exploration can be extra tedious. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're in an area and when you move north, you have 3 paths to take. Odds are one of those is the right path, and the other 2 probably have some sort of chest, landmark, or nothing. You work your way in one of those directions only to find out it was the right way all along. If you're anything like me, that's no bueno. Those other paths have to have something, right? So you commit to backtracking to those other areas to find whatever goodies are hidden there. If this was a game that had random encounters, that would be a very annoying proposition. It would be slightly less annoying in a game where you can see your enemies on the screen because you can choose to bypass them. But Rise of the Third Power takes it one step further. Rise uses the latter of the 2 options by placing enemies on the map for you to see, then implement a soul mechanic where enemies only respawn if you sleep. So if you choose the right path and want to backtrack, no harm, no foul. Assuming you took out the enemies the first time through, the only extra time it takes comes from the actual walk back. It saved me so much time trying to backtrack to find items, and is the first time I've seen that mechanic used in a game like this. On to the negatives. My first negative relates to the few bugs I ran into, one of which cost me about an hour of playtime. It's one that could honestly be a bit unique to me in my situation though. I have a house that is incredibly dry in the winter, and I can't look at something metal right now without getting shocked. On 2 occasions, I set the controller down to use the restroom or eat or do something, and when I came back and grabbed the controller, I got shocked. Well, that shock occasionally would trick my controller, which typically is plugged into my Xbox and not being used wirelessly, to disconnect. So when trying to reconnect to back out of the controller disconnected prompt, the sound effect would play acknowledging that I pushed the button to leave the menu, but the game would lock up. The first time it happened, the autosave hadn't updated for close to 3 hours. So I had to use my most recent manual save, which was an hour prior. I'm not entirely sure either as to why my autosave was so far back, but that's the only time I noticed that particular issue, as well as the second time I experienced the bug, the autosave had actually kicked in right before it happened. The second QA related thing came as I got further into the game. There were quite a few grammatical errors that were noticeable. I don't consider them big problems, but it did cause me to trip over my words a couple times while trying to figure out their intended meaning. Easily fixable, not too big of a deal. My second negative is related to general navigation issues. I've said before in my reviews that I try not to criticize things that aren't there, so maybe chalk this one up as a suggestion instead. But sometimes navigating back to prior locations can be a tedious affair without the ability of fast travel. There were times where I wanted to get to a certain point on the map, but in order to do so I had to go through 2 or 3 different locations. Sometimes it was as easy as navigating through a town or a fort, but other times I had to go through areas infested with monsters just to make it back to a place I've been before. Even the ability to walk through areas you've already visited on the world map would be a good option, as opposed to loading into an area you've been, trying to remember the path through, and coming out the other side. And my final negative is the lack of tutorials. First off, it's not that I needed additional help with the game, but there were some things that I wish were explained better, or like at all. One thing that had me flummoxed all the way through was the exhaustion mechanic. After each fight, the party you used in battle would accrue exhaustion in the form of a percentage. Unless I missed it early, I have no idea what that did to my characters. I never let it get higher than 70% or so, but I also never noticed any ill effects from it. Also, and I hope this comes from not understanding, but the female party members seem to get exhausted at 2 or 3 times the rate of the male party members. Having finished the game, I'm still unclear as to what its purpose was. Another thing that could have been explained is in relation to the way characters gain MP back. Rowan's Guts mechanic and Karina's MP accrual was explained at the beginning, but for the rest of the characters, I'm not sure if the mechanics for the first two carried over or if each character's rate of replenishment was different. There are skills and items that can replenish, but I'm still not sure if each character has a different baseline replenish rate or not. And there you have it. To quickly wrap up the positives and negatives and throw a score on this thing, here's a quick recap. My positives were battle mechanics, characters, overall story, music, progression, and enemy respawns, and my negatives were bugs, navigation problems, and lack of tutorials. Overall, I think this game is a tremendous homage to the 16-bit era of RPGs, an era I honestly consider the golden age of gaming. You owe it to yourself to check out this game if you have any affinity at all for that time in games. There are some quality of life improvements that could and more than likely will be made, and I'm not sure if everyone will be entirely pleased with how the story wraps up, but with the strong writing, the clever approach to combat, and the 35+ hour story that never overstays its welcome, this is a pixel art epic that should be played. I'm giving Rise of the Third Power a 9 out of 10. Thank you all so much for checking out my review of Rise of the Third Power. As you can see, I really enjoyed my time with it, and I strongly encourage anyone who is a fan of the genre to give it a shot. If there's more you want to know or ask questions about, feel free to leave a comment. Also, if you could be so kind, go ahead and like the video and hit the subscribe button. You can also come find me on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Hover, which are all linked below. I stream full-time Monday through Friday on Twitch from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I'd love to see you pop over to that chat as well. Thank you again for checking out the video. Have a great rest of your day.